Imagine this. A routine police call turns into something no one saw coming. An old woman, quietly living her life, suddenly finds herself face to face with an accusation that could change everything. The cops call her a fraud, but what happens next will leave you speechless. This isn't just another story of mistaken identity or misunderstanding. The woman, whose name we'll reveal shortly, has been living a peaceful, unassuming life for years. But when law enforcement shows up at her door, what they think they know is completely wrong. And just when things seem like they're about to take a dark turn, the story takes an unbelievable twist. The tension rises as the SWAT team rolls in, ready for a confrontation. But instead of hostility, something extraordinary happens. They don't arrest her, they salute her. Yes, you heard that right. A SWAT team, in full tactical gear, showing the ultimate respect for this woman. How did this happen? What's the real story behind the fraud accusation? And what did she do to earn the honor of a salute from one of the most elite teams in law enforcement? Stick around because the truth behind this shocking encounter is about to unfold. And trust me, you won't want to miss the shocking revelation that changes everything. To understand how this all started, we need to go back a few days. The woman at the center of this story is Margaret, a 78-year-old retired teacher who spent most of her life helping children. For years, she's lived quietly in a modest house tucked away in a peaceful neighborhood. To the outside world, she's just another elderly woman, someone who could easily be overlooked. But, as it turns out, Margaret is far more than meets the eye. A few days ago, a local police officer received a tip about an alleged fraud happening right under their noses. According to an anonymous report, Margaret had been operating a scam, taking money from unsuspecting individuals. The officer didn't think twice and quickly mobilized a response, thinking it was just another routine call. But what they didn't know was that this was about to spiral into something no one could have predicted. When they knocked on Margaret's door, they expected to catch her red-handed. Instead, they found a woman who was calm, collected, and, according to some accounts, seemingly unfazed by the accusations. Margaret denied the allegations without hesitation, but the officer wasn't convinced. And that's when things started to take a strange turn. The situation quickly escalated, drawing the attention of the SWAT team, who arrived prepared for a much more dangerous scenario than they could ever have imagined. As the SWAT team arrived at Margaret's house, the tension was palpable. Officers, clad in full gear, moved swiftly toward her front door, their radios crackling with orders. To them, this was just another operation, another suspect to handle. But what they didn't know was that they were about to face a puzzle far more complex than they could have ever imagined. Margaret stood at the door, now facing a much more serious situation than she ever anticipated. The local police officer, still convinced of the fraud claims, handed over the case to the SWAT team. It seemed like a standard escalation, a perceived threat, a woman caught in the middle of something she had no idea about. But as the SWAT team entered, their suspicion grew. There was something off about the whole situation. Margaret remained calm throughout the ordeal. She wasn't shaking, nor was she showing any signs of fear. Some of the officers later admitted they expected her to start panicking, maybe even try to run, given the seriousness of the charges, but she didn't. Instead, she asked if she could make tea for the officers. In the chaos, it was clear that there was something far deeper at play. Margaret's neighbors, who had gathered outside, started whispering among themselves. Some of them believed the accusations against her. After all, rumors about a scam had been swirling in the community. But others were starting to wonder if there was more to the story than what the police were saying. Who could have made such a bold accusation against her, and why? Was there something about Margaret's past that was being hidden, or was this all some kind of elaborate misunderstanding? As the SWAT team prepared for what they thought was an imminent confrontation, a strange question hung in the air. Was Margaret really guilty of what they were accusing her of, or was this a case of mistaken identity that would soon unravel in the most unexpected way? As the minutes ticked by, the situation grew more tense by the second. Margaret stood in the middle of her living room, surrounded by armed officers. The SWAT team's heavy presence seemed out of place in her cozy home, where the smell of freshly brewed tea filled the air. But no one was sipping tea. Instead, everyone's eyes were on her, waiting for something to happen, something that could explain the strange chain of events unfolding in front of them. The police officer who had originally responded to the call was becoming increasingly frustrated. He couldn't understand why Margaret wasn't reacting the way they expected. She was supposed to be a criminal, hiding behind her gentle smile and soft-spoken words. But there was something in her eyes, something that made him second-guess his initial judgment. Suddenly, a call came through on the officer's radio. The commander on the other end spoke in urgent tones, instructing them to hold their position and not to make any sudden moves. There was a new development, something that would change the course of the entire investigation. It turned out that the report they had received about the fraud had been a mistake. The tip-off was based on a series of misinterpreted clues, leading the police to believe that Margaret was involved in a crime she had nothing to do with. But just as they were about to pull back and reassess the situation, a new revelation came to light. Margaret wasn't just a victim of a mistake. She had a history that was far more intertwined with the case than anyone could have imagined. The SWAT team, still uncertain, was now questioning everything they thought they knew about her. Then, as if on cue, one of the officers noticed something on the wall behind Margaret, a photograph. It was a framed image of her from years ago, standing proudly in uniform. The officer stepped closer to examine it, the realization slowly dawning on him. There was no mistaking it. Margaret wasn't just an ordinary old woman. She was someone they had heard of before, someone who had been a key figure in a high-profile operation years ago. The mystery deepened. Was she connected to something much larger than they had thought? And what did this mean for the way they were handling her now? With the tension at its peak, the officers found themselves at a crossroads. They could either back off and treat Margaret as an innocent bystander, or push forward with the investigation, unsure of where it would lead. But there was no denying it. This was no longer just a simple fraud case. Something much bigger was at play, and the answers lay just beyond their reach. Just as the officer stared at the photograph of Margaret in her uniform, something else caught his attention, a name written in small letters beneath it. It read, Margaret Hayes, Special Operations. The officer's pulse quickened. He had heard of that name before, but not in this context. Was this the same Margaret Hayes who had been a key player in a covert mission years ago? A mission so secretive that only a handful of people knew the full story. Margaret's past had been hidden, buried deep in classified files, and now it was coming back to the surface in the most unexpected way. The officer turned to his colleagues, but before anyone could speak, a loud crash rang out from the street. Outside, a black van screeched to a halt in front of Margaret's house. In an instant, several men in plainclothes rushed out, their faces obscured by masks. The tension escalated as the SWAT team immediately went on high alert. "Get down," one of the officers shouted, aiming his weapon toward the newcomers. The masked men didn't hesitate, moving swiftly toward the front door. But it wasn't an assault, it was something else, something even more shocking. As they approached, one of them pulled a document from his coat and handed it to the officer in charge. The officer hesitated as he took the document, his eyes scanning the contents. The text was brief but chilling. "Return Margaret Hayes to us. We know what you found. This matter is beyond your jurisdiction." The room fell silent as the full weight of the situation set in. These weren't just random men. They were part of a far more powerful organization, one that had its eyes on Margaret for reasons no one yet understood. Margaret remained still, her face unreadable. She had known this day would come, but she had never expected it to unfold like this. The officers were caught in a bind. What should they do now? The story they had thought they were unraveling had just taken a dangerous turn. They were no longer just investigating a fraud. They had unknowingly stumbled into a web of secrets far darker and more complicated than they could have ever imagined. And Margaret, it seemed, was at the center of it all. The SWAT team, unsure whether to trust Margaret or question her more deeply, was now faced with a dilemma. The newcomers had made it clear they had the power to take her, to silence her, and they weren't going to leave without her. But why? What role had Margaret really played in all of this? What had she been hiding all these years? With the stakes higher than ever, the officers now had to decide. Should they protect Margaret, or let her go with the mysterious men who seemed to control everything?